Today is Thursday, August 1st. It's about 3 days before the new moon. I have not been able to do any astro for at least 2 weeks now. And the reason is, if you want to take a look around, we've had a lot of smoke due to fires here in eastern Oregon. And for the first time, I'm beginning to reveal what is now my basic test of the fire season. And that is, can I make out Canyon Mountain with any sense of clarity? And Canyon Mountain's about 7,000 or 8,000 feet high, and you can see the peak off over there. This is the first time I've actually been able to really delineate the atmosphere from the mountain itself. Otherwise, it kind of looks more like a cloud rather than actually looking like a mountain peak. And of course, there are clouds in the sky. I'm not as sure whether or not I will actually be able to do astro tonight. You can get a sense that there is still some smoke up there. It doesn't really make much sense to go out and do astronomy when the sky is smoked out. And certainly doesn't make sense when the clouds are covering the sky. But these are the conditions, and I'm hoping later on this evening around 10 o'clock, I will be able to get out and do some more imaging. I'm not sure what I'll feature tonight, but I'm thinking something along the lines of going back to the my normal 128 flood and 42 decibels and capturing some Messier studies, just so we'll have something to look at. Anyway, I've also started a Rumble channel, but it's not going to really feature astro. It's just going to feature images of the sky with music on it. I'll let you know more about that later. Anyway, there's our look. Thursday, August 1st, 8:05. I've got the normal camera that adapts to the light. Automatic mode. I'm doing a little sweep around. You can see there's still plenty of dust in the atmosphere. The only place it looks reasonably blue is overhead. There's really not a cloud in the sky. This is all dust. I wanted to have you take a look over here at Canyon Mountain because it's barely delineated. I'll zoom in on it. We had a much better view earlier, but it's very difficult to make out the peak of Canyon Mountain in the distance. Yeah, that's it. Right, let me see if I can get right about there. Very difficult. See that? Those are the nearer hills off in that direction, and that's Canyon in that direction there. So the conditions are not very good. I ordinarily would not be out doing any astro this evening for this situation, but as you might see, I've got the sky, the 150 Skywatcher pointed towards the zenith. It lined up pretty good. It was off by about 45 seconds, however. It's been that long. So 3 seconds a day, delta, 15 days, 2 weeks, as I said earlier. But I will come out, image a few studies, probably the brighter Messiers. Well, it's about 9, maybe 10 minutes after 9 in the evening. And I mentioned earlier that I was going to do an exploration despite the smoke in the atmosphere, and I was going to go ahead and do some imaging. But I mentioned I was going to go back to my standard values for shutter speed and gain. But I'm going to try an interesting experiment tonight. I am going to, instead of setting it to manual, we're going to go to auto mode. Now watch what happens to the screen in auto mode. Notice Messier 57 is now visible, it's not overexposed. Might be a very interesting experiment tonight. Of course, there'll be multiple variables. There'll be both the smoke in the sky plus putting it in auto mode for exposure time and sensitivity. But we're going to go ahead and play with that anyway. We're in day, night mode, day, which means color. There's some other settings here we're not going to play with. There's the white balance, which is manual. But let's go ahead and play tonight because we're not going to get particularly good views. However, it'll be very interesting to allow the CCD imager itself to set the exposure time and sensitivity. Scene select. Oh, I thought I just set that to full auto. Wow, that was interesting. I didn't realize there were going to be two autos. Custom, ITS, which is not going to be very useful. Backlighting, well, at least we're revealing some studies here with the backlight function. Outdoor, we're seeing some changes there. Indoor, little exploration here. Full auto. Back to custom. Press auto mode and okay, so what I've basically done is I've set up the shutter speed to auto. Alright, that'll be interesting, especially when it comes to brighter studies like Messier 57, the ring nebula you're seeing here. They tend to get washed out. Same thing with globular clusters that are very bright. So this should be an interesting experiment. Let's just leave shutter AGC at auto. White balance, everything else, day, night to day, so we get color. Let's leave scene select to custom, so it basically holds things, and just keeping it down to one parameter besides the smoke. So tonight, let's go ahead and explore auto shutter speed, which I hope is going to be 6 passes. I also noticed it reset it to 36 decibels of gain. So let's give it another 45 minutes for sky dark to supervene, as dark as it's going to get. And remember, the transparency is going to be problematic because of the smoke in the atmosphere. But there are no clouds tonight. By the way, I was going to go out and do this last night, but clouds did roll in. And there's our view. Now, I think the color's a little overpowering, so maybe what I'll do is I'll reduce the brightness down. Well, maybe not 0, but let's just put it on 5. Alright, so that's going to be our settings for this evening. I'll let you know if there's going to be any change. So there we have it, Messier 57 in auto shutter speed mode. Alright, okay, let's see what happens as we image Messier 13 and Great Hercules cluster in auto mode. What I'm liking about it so far is the stars are nice and tight. Not bad. We're not getting nearly as bright a view, and we're not going to see it with as much distinction as far as its overall brightness, but we are getting some nice resolution of the stars in auto shutter speed mode. I would say this is probably something around maybe a 6-inch view that you get in the eyepiece. So since I flipped the scope over to the west, why don't we go ahead and see if we can get a look at Messier 4 as well. I think the alignment of the scope's pretty decent. Messier 4 has drifted a little further towards the top of the screen, but you can see it resolving itself on the screen. I don't have a very particularly good view of it, but I can see that it is being reasonably well centered up. So Messier 4, I'm going to just go ahead and step through, even though we're a little early for sky dark, we'll just step through some of the Messier studies as part of this tour using auto mode shutter speed. By the way, I do believe the gain on is 36 decibels. I happened to stumble across that. I could probably set it up to 42 and leave it at that, but we'll just leave it at 36 for the time being. Anyway, you can see that nice axis of stars that runs straight across the core of Messier 4. Okay, what we should be seeing on the screen developing now is a pre-culminatory Messier 6. It's an open cluster in Scorpion, so I'm not going to give you any data. We're just making a bit of a tour at this point to get a look at it. Very large open cluster. I think it's also known as Ptolemy's cluster because it was first seen by the Greeks. Ptolemy, I'm not sure exactly whether he was AD or BC. But anyway, he was the first one to annotate it in writings. Open cluster Messier 6. Here we're having a look at Messier 7, another open cluster in Scorpius. It's magnitude 3.3, very large. So that's a quick view. Now the scope is kind of tilting back towards the east now. So I'm going to look for some more studies in the Messier range before we view a few overhead types in the NGC catalog beginning around NGC 6700. I have just been visited by Michael and his two nephews. And what's your nephew? What's your names again?
Braxton.
What's
We
it?
got Braxton and Bryker.
Bryker
Bryker
and Braxton.
and Braxton.
They both start with BR.
Yep.
Bryker and Braxton.
Actually, B-R-A. My youngest is Bane.
Oh, BR. How old are you guys? How old are you guys?
8, 7, and 3.
8. Who's 3 here? Is that Michael? Michael or
Bane.
you? I'm
Well,
just
maybe.
kidding.
Bane's actually at home. He's getting ready for some.
Oh yeah,
some
3
sleepy
years
time.
of age.
And
Yeah.
Yeah.
we're gonna put some charades.
Wow.
Some
You got
charades, huh?
charades.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna have snacks.
You know what you could do with charades though? You could put a light and you could shine it against a wall and you can make things.
A puppet.
You could, and so you
Finger
could,
puppets.
finger puppet or shadow puppets.
That's
yeah,
right.
You could do
How
something
do you make like a spider or like?
Well, I don't know.
What's
A
that?
spider would be like this. Anyway, so what we're looking at here is what is called a globular cluster. Does anybody remember what we call a globular cluster? If it was on the Earth, what we would call it? It's a city of stars.
That's
Yes,
right.
yes, and that's
of course.
that is a city of stars. It's called Messier 22.
What's that big white
You
thing
see it?
in the top right corner?
You
that
know,
just
this
moved?
thing right here is
Yeah.
a star, a brighter star.
It just moved.
Yeah, you know what? Because if we shift around on the floor here,
It moves a little bit.
it makes the telescope
Oh, it just moved.
shift a little bit. Yeah, see how it jumps around like that?
See, watch. See?
Yeah, it's because
See, it'll move just a
when-
little bit.
when I moved around
Let's-
like 2 times, it
Let's move
moved.
very little, okay?
So one of the things I have to learn to do this imaging like I'm doing now, this is called real-time astronomical imaging using a CCD sensor and a TFT display. And then I use a camera to capture what's on the screen, a video camera, and then I can talk and I can say things. So if you want to hear more about this Messier 22, what I do is I press a button here, I say go to, catalog,
Braxton.
object,
Look at what he's doing
and
here.
then I press one called Messier, then I put in a number, and I hit enter, and lo and behold, my little thing I'm holding in my hand says,
Oh.
this is Messier 22, it's a globular cluster, and then you have to know the secret of what SGC is, that means Sagittarius, and it says M5.2, that's the brightness, magnitude 5.2,
That's right.
and it also says
What is
something
all
here.
those things in the middle?
Those are the stars that
That's
make
the
it.
cluster.
That's the brightest stars in it. But
That's right.
There's like 50 to 100,000 stars in this. So it's
Oh, yeah.
this globular
That's a
cluster
lot.
is pretty close. You know how I can tell how close it is? It's because it says right here, 10,400 light years away.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know how far 10,400 light years is?
No,
Careful, buddy.
no.
You know, one way of understanding light years is to realize the way we are seeing this globular cluster is the way it was 10,400 years ago. Remember when I told you about that comet striking the Greenland ice sheet?
Yeah.
That was 12,800 years ago.
That's
So
right.
the light from these stars started shining only 2,000 years after the comet struck the
Can we go
Greenland
to your
ice
friend's
sheet.
house?
What that big thing looks like. Tell me what you think that big thing in the middle looks
Saturn?
like. What does it look like? Does
looks
it look
like
like
an
a ball? Does it look like a ball?
It looks like it looks like this.
But it's got a problem with the ball. There's a hole in the
Neptune?
center. It's
Oh, it's moving. It's moving. Oh, it's
you know,
getting
it's
bigger.
moving. Why? Because we're moving. It's getting brighter, right? Because this imaging system, this thing here, this little sensor box, is gathering more and more and more light.
Yeah,
But as we move around,
Careful.
it jumps around a little bit on the screen.
Yeah, that's a ring nebula. That's a big gas ball.
And you know what that tells us about this? Its star is getting old and it's
That's
getting tired. So there's a little star in the middle of this ring, and it's very, very old. And when they get to the end, they start breathing out. They go, ooh, and they start making all their gases, and their gases that are on the outer part of the star start going out into space because they're getting very, very hot inside, and they're pushing the gases out into space. So this one, go ahead, you have a question?
I can see like black things and like.
Those are all stars.
No, there's like a half a black thing on the on
in the
that
middle of it.
circle. Yeah.
In the middle of it, that's where the star is found, but most of the illuminated gases and dust are away from the star, so
That's
it looks like there's no gas and dust in the center of the star, but you know that's not really the case. You know what's really going on here?
What?
We're seeing this from the edge, not from the middle. So that's why it looks dark in the middle, because we're seeing it like.
So I got a question
go
real
ahead.
quick. I can't remember. So are we looking at the star in the future or in the past?
Where are everything we see, even if you look at each other, we're all seeing each other in the past.
That's right.
It's just that we can't tell because we're so close together.
So we're looking at that star right now as it was in the past.
1,700 years ago.
That's right.
We are seeing this after Jesus was born.
That's right.
By several hundred years.
That's right.
So before
Careful, buddy.
Jesus was born, that appeared.
No,
So-
we're seeing it like if Jesus were 300 years old. That's the way we're seeing it.
So Riker, so imagine. So how many years did you say?
300?
300.
So that star, we are seeing that star right now 300 years ago.
No, 1,700 years ago.
So 1,700 years ago. So right now, even though we're looking at this, because it is so far away to project an image to us, it took 1,700 years to project that image that
At the
we're
speed
seeing right
of
now.
light.
At the speed of light.
You know how long it takes light from the sun? to
Isn't
get there?
that cool?
You know what else is cool?
What's that?
This ball has stars on it.
Yeah?
Right here, stars.
Yeah,
That's pretty
wow.
cool.
But let me say one other thing.
Yep.
We are seeing that now. Look. When we look at the
Watch.
sun, we're seeing the light from our own sun that came out of the sun 8 minutes ago, because we are 93 million miles away from the
So
sun.
that's the light from the sun.
That's the
Yep.
light from a very distant sun and a very old sun, and we are seeing it as though we are looking at the north or south pole of that sun.
That's right.
Not along the side like we look at our sun. We're seeing it from the top to the bottom, not from the side. Well, after that unexpected and delightful visit from Braxton and Riker and Michael, I'm returning back into auto mode for the imaging, and we're looking at Messier 8, the Lagoon Nebula. You can see the bright central core with some hints of nebulosity in the distance, a little bit of the obscuration nebula right in through there. Not a great view. To give you a sense of the time, we're almost at 10 o'clock. This is probably about as, I would almost declare this sky dark, except there's so much dust in the air that we're not getting very good views. So let me continue along a little bit with some other studies before we knock off this evening. Our next view is Messier 11, the wild duck cluster. You can see a vast horde of sprinkling of stars. And as I recall mentioning to Braxton and his brother, this is not a globular cluster. This is not a city of stars. It's a town of stars. Messier 11, the wild duck cluster, very well populated though. However, the stars are much further apart than you'd find them in a globular cluster. Let's go ahead and see what else we can turn up. Here we're going to have a view of Messier 16, the Eagle Nebula. And cluster, we're not going to see much of the nebulosity at all, although I'm seeing some faint hints at it. What we're basically doing is getting a nice view of the open cluster Messier 16. Once again, we've returned to full auto exposure mode, and that's basically going to give you your best image, but it's not going to reveal faint nebulosity unless the nebulosity itself is prominent on the screen, which which we should be able to see in our next study. So here we're getting a view of Messier 17, and of course that's the Swan nebulosity. I would say we're getting something the equivalent to about a 6-inch view. Once again, we're going to get nice views of stars. They're going to look much better than when we use higher exposure rates. We also have the problem of course, the smoke in the atmosphere. But at least we are getting out and we're having an opportunity to play with auto shutter speed mode. But before I knock off, which should be pretty soon given the fact that the battery's starting to run a bit low on the camera, let's take a look at if we did run it up to normal manual mode, how it would look. Because I guess we got a pretty good idea that when you operate in the auto mode, you're going to get very good views of stars, but everything else is going to be lacking. So let's see what we get. Obviously the image formation time is much longer now. Wow, I'm not seeing anything on the screen. We're still on Messier 17. Typically takes 40 seconds to fully generate an image. And you can see it cycling through this various steps. Alright, Swan's beginning to reveal itself. There we go. Well, not a particularly good view given the transparency situation this evening, but it's definitely more enhanced than when we looked at it in the manual, the auto mode. We're getting a little more presence of the Swan. I'd say it's roughly equivalent to maybe an 8-inch setting that I ordinarily would have set up. And 8 or 9-inch scope. So that's our view of the Swan Nebula, Messier 17. Let's see if we can turn up a couple more. I got a bar or two left on the battery of the camera. We did some really long imaging time talking with the boys earlier. So this video is going to run a little bit long. But then again, most of my videos run a bit long. So there's our view of Messier 17 and Swan. Perhaps we should go back to Messier, the lagoon, and have a look at that as well. Messier 8, I believe. As you can see, we're getting a slightly better look at Messier 8, the lagoon nebula. We're seeing much more expansive nebulosity around the core. We're seeing some extended nebulosity off to this position, with the obscuration nebula fairly obvious on the screen as well. So there we have it, Messier 8, lagoon at normal settings of 128 flood. However, I do want to look to see if by the end of this evening, which should be too long, whether or not we're operating at 36 decibels or 42 decibels of AGC sensitivity. Okay, I thought this would, remember I did want to check out a few NGCs, especially galaxies. This is NGC 6700. It's a 13.1 magnitude, 1.4 by 1 arc-minute galaxy of class spiral with a large bar and lowercase c. 209 million light years distant, puts it probably somewhere around 75,000 light years in diameter. We're at right ascension 184604. Declination 321647. We are getting a full exposure of the aperture of the scope. We are operating at normalized 128 flood, and I believe it'll be 42 decibels of gain. Let me take a look at that now. Not that I really enjoy flashing through these settings. Yes, it is. Those are the standard settings. So in return, exit and saving. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and see what, if there's another 67 in the 6700 series, maybe a brighter galaxy. Here's, oh, too far north. Far north. Another galaxy in Lyra. Oh, this may be this. No, it's 13, a little bit larger. Another 13.1 magnitude galaxy. Let's see if we can make the hop to there. Here I'm hoping we'll get a view of NGC 6710. Another galaxy in Lyra, same magnitude, 13.1, but slightly larger. 1.7 by 1 arc-minute spiral with a lowercase a, no bar, therefore, once removed from the lenticular class. This galaxy is likewise about 209 million light years distant, but it's further south in declination. It's at plus 26 degrees 50 minutes. Now I am not getting much of a view of any constellations up in the sky. Part of the problem is I am having the screen in my eye, but I do believe the galaxy's core is located right about there. Alright, this one is a bit of a challenge. NGC 6749 is a globular cluster in Aquila. It's about magnitude 12.4, so about twice as bright as the previous galaxies we looked at, which were magnitude 13.1. However, the light is spread out over 6.3 arc minutes. Brightest stars are magnitude 16.5, and those should be resolvable on a very good night using these settings and scope. Unfortunately, that is not going to be the case this evening. I do believe you can make out hints of the globular cluster right there at the tip of my finger. So at least we are seeing something of this rather sprawling 12.4 magnitude globular cluster. There's our view. I'll skip around for a few more interesting studies in the NGC catalog series at normal set points, so we can get an idea of what happens when a little bit of smoke gets in your eyes. A little more variety. NGC 6751 in the NGC catalog is a planetary nebula in Aquila. Magnitude 12, 20 arc seconds in size, so it should be visible, and I do believe we're seeing it on the screen right there. The central star is magnitude 13, although it may be very difficult to distinguish from the nebulosity itself. The planetary is 8,400 light years distant, right ascension 1905-55, declination -5, almost 6 degrees, -559, 31. But a very clear view of this 12th magnitude planetary nebula. All right, I almost skipped right past this, but when I noticed it had 100 stars in it, I thought it might be worth the view, and it is quite well, although the stars themselves are sprinkled around the field and fairly subtle. NGC 6755 is an open cluster in Aquila, magnitude 7.5, 15 arc minutes in size, so it pretty much is filling the screen. Roughly 100 stars, the brightest of which are magnitude 10.2, so these brighter, larger orbs there are members of the cluster. It is a class 4-2, which means fairly well spread out with reasonable amount of brightness uniformity. 4,600 light years distant. We're at right ascension 1907-49, declination +4 degrees and 16 minutes. Nice sprinkling of stars in this cluster. NGC 6760 is a globular cluster in Aquila, and you can see it quite readily on the screen. Magnitude 9.1, a little too faint to be Messier class, but fairly small, 2.4 arc minutes. Its brightest stars are magnitude 15.6. It's a class 9, which typically means the brightest stars should be maybe 5 magnitudes fainter than the cluster as a whole, but this is a little bit more than that. It's right ascension 1911-11, declination 1 degree, 1 minute and 49 seconds. There's our view. This is the penultimate view for the evening, and I think you have an idea of what our final Carpe Noctem view will be for this Thursday evening, the 1st of August, 2024. Let's watch this final study of the evening develop. It is, of course, a favorite of all amateur astronomers. I can hardly think of anyone who wouldn't agree with me that has seen it through the eyepiece or in imaging. Notice that unlike the Ring Nebula, we are seeing this particular planetary nebula from the side. So we are seeing not from the poles, but from the equatorial region of the central star. That central star, I believe, is magnitude 14.1. I will give you that information from SCA 27, the Dumbbell Nebula. Planetary nebula, magnitude 7.3, totally 8 by 5.6 arc minutes, 1,300 light years distant. I'm not seeing information on the central star. I think you only get that when you look it up in the NGC, but I believe it's 14.1 magnitude. This beautiful planetary nebula, at its best, will look like an extended football, and I'm seeing hints of that actually. I'm seeing the central star. I'm quite impressed with the view we're actually getting here. So maybe we should reconsider the smoke that gets in your eyes. However, for the time being, I am going to say Carpe Noctem.